don't know how. It doesn't make any sense to them. How often have you sat with a client and tried to make this transition from, okay, do you see this pattern in the way this is playing out in your life? No. Right? The pattern makes a whole lot of sense to you, but the client's going, no, I don't see it. That involves that abstract thinking and problem-solving ability. And they're actually, if your clients experience trauma, at some point in any one of these stages of development, it can literally impact how the brain develops. So your client may not be able to regulate emotion. Those synapses may have never developed. Bruce Perry tells a great story of Tina and her mom. Those of you that are familiar with Bruce Perry, he's a neuroscientist who works with children in trauma. And Tina was demonstrating a lot of aggression. Her mother loved her dearly. But her mother had also experienced trauma in the first 3 years and didn't know how to regulate her own emotion and demonstrate that love because those synapses simply weren't developed. Some important things to keep in mind. Because the stress response system, the fight, flight, or freeze system, is located in the brainstem, it literally impacts the entire brain, from bottom all the way to the top. Neurotransmitters, these are the chemical messengers that transmit messages from one cell to the other. Every function of the brain occurs across this synaptic connection. Okay. The main neurotransmitters for our stress response are norepinephrine or noradrenaline and epinephrine or adrenaline. That's what's going to ignite our stress response and ignite the fight or flight, primarily response that we're looking for. So all the implications of this, the hardware is in place at birth, software is developed primarily during the first 3 years of life. Memory is one of the primary functions of the brain and plays a large part in who we are. We're constantly, whether we're aware of it or not, comparing what's happening right now to something we've experienced previously to determine whether or not the situation is a threat. And our brains are constantly filtering information through memory. And it's a use it or lose it system. So what all of this means, in a really quick nutshell, is that children are actually more vulnerable to trauma, to stress, anxiety than adults are. Because of the impact on the brain and where they are in brain development. The brain is most sensitive to experience in early life. The earlier the experience, the more sensitive and the higher the impact is on the individual. And the brain needs consistent stimuli to develop. Again, use it or lose it. Let's talk about what trauma actually does to the brain. I've already said memory is important, so we're constantly comparing information all the time. And this thing begins in the brainstem, in the lowest part of the brain. And the question that we're constantly determining is this situation dangerous? If it's a new or unfamiliar in a situation, the stress response is going to automatically activate, period, bottom line. Just because it's new and we don't know. And the first thing that happens is our heart, which actually has more connections to the brain than any other organ in the body, starts to send messages to the brain saying, shut down the cortex. Now, what's housed in the cortex? Abstract thinking and problem solving, probably the two very things that we need, right, to be able to move through whatever situation it is. But we're shutting that down because it's a non-essential function for survival. When it is a literal threat to our survival, that doesn't matter. Fight or flight. Okay? Do I fight? Do I run? That's the only decision I need to make at this point. The limbic system is assessing for social cues. So again, you can say all of these great, wonderful things to kids who are about to take their state exams and have every weight of the world on them, right? and all the pressure we put on kids for these exams, we can build them up and talk them up all day long. But if the stress response is activated, it doesn't matter. They're looking for social cues. They're looking for that teacher to stand in front of them and literally embody, it's going to be okay. We're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. Okay? The heart rate is increasing because it's sending blood, and with that blood is stores of energy. Every time we consume food, our body's actually storing energy certain places for fight or flight. And so blood is literally going out all over to send that energy to our bodies so that we can run or fight. That's the reason your heart rate goes up. And every other non-essential function is shut down. Digestion, so all of the abstract thinking, the brain literally is going down to the brainstem, just shutting down. So that energy can be used in the most efficient way, which is fight or flight. So fear quite literally makes us dumber. Okay? We're using the lower systems of our brain to allow for faster processing. And if sustained, we stay in a state of hyperarousal. So here's the problem. We have evolved as beings to create all of these scenarios that we think we need to ignite our stress response system. Okay? The problem is that our stress response system hasn't evolved yet to allow us to actually determine whether or not it is a literal threat to our physical safety. So all of us are essentially walking around in a state of hyperarousal to some extent, just because our brains are constantly doing that. That pop quiz that your teacher assigned, really not a threat to your safety, right? But your fight or flight totally kicked in because our brains have evolved to that point. They've not evolved to allow us to actually make that determination. Okay. So one of the things that we've got to keep in mind with this is that when it comes to the stress response system and the experience of trauma, our stress response system, sometimes things become traumatic that in fact are not. So remembering that trauma is within the experience of the individual. Anxiety, panic, fight or flight is within the experience of the individual. Right? Does that make sense? The opposite can also happen, and this is dissociation. So this is what we do when we can't fight or flee. And we all do it. Okay, it's a very primitive reaction, and it's most common in young children. So something to be aware of as well. PTSD is more common with those who had dissociative responses during trauma. They're more likely to develop PTSD. And what's happening with dissociation is we're actually preparing the body for injury. So instead of the heart rate increasing, the heart rate slows to reduce blood loss. So we're trying to bring the blood in from the extremities to the center of the body. Endogenous opioids, which is basically our natural heroin-like substance, is already introduced into the bloodstream to reduce pain. And dissociation occurs along a continuum from really ordinary states to more extreme states. So how many of you have ever left work, left school, and driven home, and you got home and you went, I don't actually remember how I got here? Yeah? You were dissociated. How many of you guys have ever just checked out for an unknown period in class and you're not really sure what was going on? You were dissociated. So we do this on a regular basis, actually.